Hello and welcome back to oh look at that. I'm saying hello and welcome to everybody, but Ben is doing a bit of what's it called?
Facial sparring.
No, I was thinking you're more like Derek Zoolander. You're
He's a bit of a knob. I can't get away with him. Like he overplays his part.
all right. Well, interesting introduction here to today's video, because we are here at Premier Injuries giving you the latest injury updates and all the information that you want about the Premier League. So welcome Reddit community. This is another one of your Q&A sessions, and just before we start, I do recommend that you press the subscribe button below, because these are weekly videos now. This is going to be a fixture towards the end of this season, but also all through next season as well. We are here to help you with your teams, and we've got the injury guru himself, Mr. Ben, as you saw there, looking good with his fresh new haircut. I still need mine, so again, another reason to say stay subscribed is to see how good or bad my haircut looks next week. But yeah, let's get into it. First question I always ask Ben is, how are you doing? Are you feeling excited for this Q&A session, and of course excited for game week 32?
Always excited to do the Q&A for the Reddit community. A close affinity with those guys, so I look forward to seeing what questions we have in store for this week. And with regards to game week 32, yes, I am. I've been off a couple of, a fairly decent couple of game weeks. This is going to be a difficult one to manage. It's obviously a protracted game week 32 spread across 6 days. So difficult to manage. We're going to have some FA Cup fixtures in between, which, it's going to mean we're going to have to take a punt on one or two players. We're going to have to try and second guess. And ultimately, we're going to have to keep our fingers crossed. We're going to have to pray to the fantasy gods and hope that we don't pick up any injuries between now and, like I say, until and kickoff. And hopefully we can come through this fairly unscathed.
And to help you come through unscathed, Ben is going to answer your questions now. So A Fardine 32, he asks, hi Ben, updates on Creswell and David Luiz, and C Guinness Stout seconds that by saying, is Luiz likely to return this season? So yeah, those two are quite big losses for both the teams that they've gone from. But yes, Creswell and David Luiz updates, Ben.
Yeah, I'll start with David Luiz first. What we know, he did have a minor surgical procedure on his knee following a training ground incident. We don't know the details, specific details of the problem. It sounds like there might just have been a bit of a clean up, maybe a little bit of tidy up. Now, Arsenal maintain the fact that he will be back before the end of the campaign. Initially, they said a couple of weeks. I read into that, it's probably going to be maybe, late April, early May with regards to a potential return to play. You can never be 100% on these things, especially when, a player's went under the knife. But providing so he doesn't suffer any setbacks, then that should be realistic. Things to consider maybe down the line and towards that point is, if Arsenal were maybe to get knocked out of the Europa League, and as we've seen in the Premier League, they're slipping down that table. Form hasn't been great. So it may be a question of what, does Mikel Arteta want to risk David Luiz, especially when he's got the likes of Pablo Amari, Callum Chambers, who can play in there, Gabriel, so there are plenty of options in that sort of centre-back place. And so, if there are any concerns, or again, if it's coming to the stage where it's just a dead rubber, then it could be that David Luiz maybe just sees the season out on the sidelines. But as it stands, he should return before the end of the campaign. Second one you mentioned was Aaron Cresswell. Aaron has had his problems with his hamstring in the past. What we do know is they tend not to keep him on the sidelines for too long. And what we do know is Aaron had a scan on Monday, and the initial sort of reports is that it's not too serious. It's just a minor concern. And again, other factors to consider and come into play here. West Ham currently sitting in 4th, pushing for a Champions League qualification spot. Now, even with a minor tweak or even a slight strain and not even necessarily a tear, a 7-day turnaround between games is a push. It really is. And what we would need to be seeing is Aaron Cresswell taking part in a full session without any issues at maximum intensity, giving what we know about his style of play. He's up and down that line. He's explosive. There's quick changes of movements. That's putting a lot of pressure, a lot of stress on that hamstring. So if there are any weaknesses in it, and he is risked and put in back too early, it will be season over for Cresswell. So it suggests maybe a game against Newcastle probably comes too soon. I say probably. I can't 100% rule him out. We've seen with Eric Peters, for example, at Burnley. He went off with a hamstring injury in game week 30, and he was back in game week 31. However, he's not as dynamic and as explosive as Cresswell. And his game's not necessarily about bombing up and down that line and really attacking, offering that attacking threat as Cresswell is. So for me, he's got, David Moyes does have Arthur Masuaku as a potential replacement who he knows back in contention, or they may want to look at Fabian Banbuela and put in a West Ham back three. We'll wait for an update. That press conference is scheduled for Friday. We're not sure. David Moyes isn't giving much away these days. He's been very coy on updates for Declan Rice and also Mikel Antonio. So don't be too surprised if he's a little bit flippant when he's asked. But, like I say, the early signs are fairly positive, if not for game week 32.
So really, he should be called David Coyes then. That should be...
Hey!
But I think, talking about jokes there, I think Arsenal at the moment are looking a bit of a joke of a side. I wouldn't be interested in them. As an Arsenal fan, Tierney is out, side is struggling, whereas West Ham, I believe in them, and I've got fingers crossed for them. They're obviously a London rival, but it'd be a fantastic story to see them in the Champions League next year. And Segan Stout has continued with the spotlight on West Ham because they have asked any news on Antonio. And I'll just give Segan Stout a shout out as well, because he was a very loyal listener to my FPL Goalmouse Scramble podcast before I came over here to work with you, Ben. So yeah, any news on Antonio, and hi there to Segan Stout.
Yeah, I alluded to before, not a lot of information coming out from West Ham. David Moyes, he sort of, what was he doing? He was testing us ahead of game week 31, where he said, Mikel Antonio, when we don't think he'll make it, but he didn't categorically rule him out. My understanding is, we're certainly looking at an injury that's maybe 2 to 4 weeks. And the reason it's such an extended or lengthy timeline without any being definitive on that, I go back to the fact there are other influencing factors. One of those being just historically how Mikel Antonio has struggled with his hamstrings. He's had a couple of surgeries in there. He's already had a couple of recent setbacks. So what you don't want to do, again, is push him and risk him and, possibly exacerbate any problems there. The good thing for David Moyes and West Ham, they seem to be performing in his absence. So that's great news. There's no pressure for him to be rushed back. There's no pressure on him to be involved. We've seen sort of Jared Bowen come in and fill that mantle, fairly well in recent games. So even if Mikel Antonio does return to the squad, it could just be on the bench initially. But certainly for Newcastle, I would suggest highly unlikely. Realistically, if I was pushed, it would be maybe more towards the end of April, maybe beginning of May. But again, consider other factors when maybe looking at those team selection decisions based on how West Ham are performing in the Premier League.
And just on Jared Bowen, we've been warm on him for the last couple of game weeks in our Attacking Assets video, which will be out when this comes out as well, so you can check it out on the channel. But yeah, we've been warm on him because of the kind of uncertainties over Antonio. JR44 is asking about the uncertainty over Razorina, though. Is he going to be okay for game week 32?
The short answer would be we don't know. What we do know is it's an impact injury. So he took a couple of knocks in the win at the Etihad. The final one was a knock on the thigh, most commonly referred to as a dead leg. So that's an external force, crushes the muscle against the femur. Very painful. More often than not, you have players returning within a 7 to 10 day timeline that can be extended. Again, depending on the severity of the problem. If you don't think it's serious, check out Christian Ziege, give it a Google, and you'll find out just how bad these things can be. Almost cost him his life, and it might have even, I think it ended his football career, be it in the top flight, certainly. So there's nothing to suggest that Razorina is that serious, but it's a painful one that's being managed. And at the minute, it's a 50-50, so it could be a late call by Marcelo Bielsa.
Mayonnaise was taken, has asked about Calvin Lewin status.
Yeah, unfortunately, he is out of the Tottenham game. Picked up a problem in one of the final sessions on the eve of the Brighton game. He did travel down to the south coast. They ran him through a few tests on the Monday morning. He didn't feel comfortable, and Carlo Ancelotti decided not to take the risk. Now, it was thought initially that he would recover in time for the Tottenham game, but we've seen, Carlo's been out. Everton have had the press conference, and it looks as if it doesn't look, he has been ruled out, but he should be back in game week 33, providing there aren't any further setbacks.
Now, the next person's username is almost as confusing as the situation that we'll be talking about. Freezos Sue 94. Hope we haven't crucified that name, but we do have a skill of doing that here, Ben, along with great impersonations. Their question is, what's going on with Grealish?
Jack Grealish, right. I suppose this is my moment to potentially defend Dean Smith in terms of the updates that he provided during that first injury when it broke. Major broadcasters suggested a 4 to 6 week timeline. Dean Smith said, I'm not ruling him out of the next game week. And at the time, what we knew of the injury was it was shin related. We suspected it was overuse. And therefore, a lot of the emphasis and the understanding of what was going on with the injury would have been player-led. So in terms of managing the pain, a lot of that was coming from Jack. Now we know, Dean Smith, you try to be open and you try to be maybe transparent in what's going on behind closed doors. That came back to bite him a little bit because, as we've seen, Jack didn't return. And I think it was potentially around the fourth week where Jack was involved with the group. He had a full week of training, done 5 days. And then on the 6th day, he actually reported a little bit discomfort. And he was withdrawn from the match day squad. Now, by Dean Smith's own admission, he probably, he suggests that Jack and the club probably pushed him a little bit too hard, to get back into contention, such as his status within that team. He's a high-profile player, and most of the good things that Villa do come from Jack Grealish. Now, this setback means that we don't have, again, a definitive timeline. Typically, when you look at an injury and a player suffers a recurrence, he's not going to return within that sort of similar time frame or before. So if we're looking at maybe Jack Grealish, who was already out for 4 weeks, it suggests that it's maybe a push to return within that 4, and it could quite easily go beyond that, which then brings into question, would he be fit for the Euros? But it's one of those injuries that has to be managed. Now, reading between the lines and understanding of maybe, the anatomy involved and the biological sort of factors involved in that. Initially, we thought it was maybe his shin splints, and that's why we're getting these sort of flare-ups. But now, so we're not saying it is Jack has suffered a stress fracture, but the club are obviously wary that if they increase the load too much and push Jack too hard, then potentially, he could suffer a fracture, which would, indeed rule him out for the remainder of the season and the Euros. So that's the concern we suspect. And this probably comes on the back of the COVID shutdown at Bodymore Heath when Jack was away, players training away from their normal natural environment, different types of training. You've probably restricted to maybe working on a treadmill, harder under the foot, maybe working hard to get back, and then being thrown into that glut of fixtures. And it's hard on the legs, it's hard on the ovaries. And again, we're talking about Jack Grealish, who was pivotal to that Aston Villa sale, the talisman, the guy that covers the most ground, the guy that takes the most kicks and the most knocks. And it's just been a bit of a perfect storm. And it's a culmination of all of those factors which have probably contributed to that injury. So sorry, I can't be a little bit more positive and give you anything more definitive, but that's just the nature of the beast that we're dealing with currently.
Little Omi wants to know, update on the legend himself, Nathan bloody Ferguson.
Nathan Ferguson, the myth, the man, the myth, the legend. Unfortunately, Nathan Ferguson has suffered another setback ahead of the previous international break. Roy Hodgson had spoke about Ferguson's likelihood that he would, be involved with the under-23s, both on the training pitches and maybe a couple of bounce games. And the idea was he would build fitness with them and then he would transition from the 23s into the first team and possibly have some first team involvement during the season running. Well, as with a lot of long-term injuries, it's not uncommon for players to pick up, muscle problems and tears. And that's what happened with Nathan Ferguson. He suffered another setback. It's not related to his knee, which is the one positive, but, it is muscle related. And, given that we're around about a month away from the end of the season, then, we will not be seeing Nathan Ferguson. Ideally, again, the club will manage him through this period. They'll ease back, through his rehab, and then with one focus on getting him, ready for pre-season, hopefully come through that without any setbacks and issues and be ready for the 2021-2022 campaign.
I mean, I do have to ask an additional question. Is Nathan Ferguson real, or is he like a figment of the AI world? Is he maybe Agent Ferguson from The Matrix?
Well, I mean, he's up there with Jean-Philippe Gabouman in terms of, his notoriety for a player being at a club and then not being seen. Obviously, Jean-Philippe did return in recent times, and unfortunately, the unlucky man has suffered another huge setback after just a couple of minutes on the pitch. So that was a training ground related. Look, it just seems to be, it's one of those vicious circles. You work hard to get back. And you can't catch a break, or literally you do catch a break, an unfortunate break, and it's put them back out. But hopefully, Nathan Ferguson, we will see him next season.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I'm making a joke there, but a serious situation with Jean-Philippe Gabouman as well, that hopefully they're both back and return to full health very soon. The next question comes from the Hen and the Sheep, or the Hen and the Sheep. Terrible butchery once again of names, talking of hen and sheeps there. But they've asked for a personal opinion from you, and maybe not a personal impression. We leave that to Matthew McConaughey and all that. But do you think Chelsea and City's intense schedule for the rest of the season reduce the value of the players to such an extent that it's worth marking them for sale next week? What's your thoughts on that one, Ben?
Conversations that we've had on many occasions, Jason, with regards to City and Chelsea assets. A lot to like. You can look at them and you can handpick, 3, 4, 5 players quite easily. But the concern for us, again, they still have Champions League involvement, and with squads which are relatively healthy. I'm thinking in terms of injuries. I mean, Chelsea, I think, have only got Kovacic at the moment. City, maybe just with Sergio Aguero. So you've got that strength and depth. Tuchel is the new Pep in terms of rotation. And I'll spit this stat out again because it's one that I love at the minute, just to sort of ram home how difficult it is to pick City assets. City over the last I think 4 game weeks in the Premier League, so game week to game week, have averaged in and around 6 changes per team. Now, you take Edison out of the equation, who is his, Guardiola's set and forget goalkeeper. So that means 60% of his Premier League team from game week to game week is being changed. Now, pick the 4 that stay and then pick the 6 who are coming in. It's difficult. Everywhere you look on that pitch, there are 2 to 3 different options depending on how Pep wants to set up his team. So, look, there's some great buys in there. The De Bruynes of this world, the Fodens, but are they going to start? And for me, we're coming into a period where you need a strong bench because rotation, does increase. I think the data that we produce, we see around an upturn of around about 20% in the number of changes in teams at this stage of the season. And will they play 90 minutes? And for me, it's difficult. And for that reason alone, as much as I do like City and as much as I see the appeal with Chelsea, there probably avoids for me. Maybe I think Edison and Mendy, the 2 keepers, are ones that if you wanted some interest. Mason Mount, it looks probably the one that's most locked in at Chelsea, and maybe Azpilicueta at City. You would have said Ruben Diaz, but he was dropped last weekend as well. One thing that I did notice, and I did put this through my socials, watch out for Pep, bigging up any player. Watch out for Pep singling out a player ahead of any game week. He done that with Ruben Diaz. I think he done that with Cancelo a couple of weeks back. If he comes out and he says, how impressed he's been with this certain player and his contribution and how, this, that, and the other. Well, the guy's on the guillotine, he's gone. So, keep your eyes and ears peeled. That's probably Pep's only tell. That's the only bit of insight you can tend to glean from Pep. Otherwise, you might as well just close your eyes, get a dart, and just stick it on that squad, and hopefully, come up with a right starting 11. So it's a risk. If you do go for them, it's a punt. And when you're talking about high-end premium players, then I want more bang for me buck and I want more guarantees elsewhere, unfortunately.
No, it doesn't seem unfortunate because that's the reality of the situation. You and I have both been worried about Man City for a long old time, and we don't have, well, I'm not sure about your team, but I don't have any of their assets in at the moment just because of that rotation risk. And Chelsea realistically might come into it as well. This is something that we have covered in the attacking situation because Chelsea look good, but who to bring in? You just don't know. All right, so we move to the final question here, and I hope everybody has enjoyed this Q&A session. Again, reminding you, this will be a weekly thing, so you can get them in to us here. But Abrakafasan, hope I've not butchered that. But, he's celebrating there because he's following along as well there, Ben. They've asked, who's the better choice to replace DCL, Iheanacho or Lacazette?
I'm presuming you're just going on a 1 week punt because we know that DCL, providing there's no setbacks, will return in game week 33. But for me, without question, without any doubt, I'm just not sold on Arsenal, and therefore, Lacazette is a non-starter for me. The Europa League game against Slavia Prague on Thursday night may sway my decision down the line. But if Arsenal keep their involvement in the Europa, I can see Mikel Arteta, he's prioritising that competition and he will cut his cloth accordingly in the league. With Kelechi, we're talking about, he is an enabler at that price point. He's in form, he's delivering. Leicester still have something to play for. Maddison has his injury problems and he's off the field. Protocol breaches going on as well. So the threat from him being thrown straight back into that team and potentially displacing Iheanacho are removed, certainly for the time being. So it's got to be Iheanacho.
Could this be, though, a replacement for DCL, though? Because obviously DCL, Everton haven't done brilliantly, especially since the international break. But in terms of my considerations, I totally agree with you, Ben. There's a lot to like about Iheanacho, and I think as well the price point. Lacazette is fairly well priced for a player who might be rested depending on the Europa League situation, but even then, in the Premier League, Arsenal have not been good. There's been quite a few problems there. The loss of Tierney, I think, is a big one as well. And, it pains me to say it. I mean, that's the team that I've got in the background right there. Arsenal are my team. We're just not that good this season. And I would not bring them in because it's just going to cause you more worries. But hopefully we have got rid of some of your worries, helped you with your teams in this weekly Q&A. I hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe. Stay tuned to the Premier Injuries channel because we've got a lot of great content here. But I'm going to pass it to Ben to sign us out.
Thanks, Jay. And thanks once again to the Reddit community for all those fantastic questions. Keep them coming. Like I say, we will be here every week ahead of each game week deadline. But for now, that's it. Good luck ahead of game week 32. It's going to be a difficult one to navigate. So you may need that luck. But fantastic. Thanks again and speak soon.